And our last presenter today, or this afternoon, is Alexandra McCaffery. She is a biodiversity consultant from Belgium, and with her expertise in biodiversity preservation and conservation, she will be presenting a gap analysis of tourism and climate in the Caribbean. Her work highlights the crucial importance of biodiversity preservation in tourism growth and will offer valuable recommendations for geotourism development. Alexandra?
Thank you. Now, hello everyone. Hi. Excuse me. Today, I'm talking from notes. I think I'm the first person I've seen today who's talking from notes. But I'm going to talk you through a project that we were commissioned to undertake earlier this year, based in the Caribbean, and it was our Caribbean colleague that undertook the project. So we thought we couldn't justify the carbon emissions to bring him here himself. So you've got me from Belgium with my notes. So sorry about that. But before I go into the details of the project, I just want to give you a quick overview of Greencase. We've been operating since 2012, and we've got offices in the UK, Europe, and the Caribbean. And we work with a wide range of organisations in areas like strategy development, research, stakeholder consultation, and training. As I've just been introduced, my own background is in biodiversity, so I like to focus on the areas where tourism and biodiversity really overlap. So I'm pleased to be able to share some insights on the project Greencase undertook together with our partners Seago and Green. This project was funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, and it examined the links between climate and tourism policies and actions in 7 Caribbean nations. So we're going at a different level here. We've talked about some very specific examples so far, but this is regional and it's very policy-based. Now, the region has a very high level of dependence on tourism. And in fact, many of the Caribbean nations, such as the Bahamas, aren't just some of the most tourism-dependent nations in the world, but also some of the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. So balancing the impact of climate change and those related risks against the need for economic growth is a major challenge for all destinations, but it's particularly true in this highly vulnerable region. Although the 7 nations examined are really quite different and they all require a tailored approach, we identified and tried to draw out for this presentation today some common issues and opportunities that we hope that destinations in Europe and beyond can really learn from. So quickly to discuss the methodology, the project focused on the alignment between actions undertaken as part of both national climate change responses and local tourism development action. And it involved desk research, stakeholder interviews, and critical analysis. We looked at over 100 literature sources, including national energy policies and climate change policies, as well as tourism master plans, tourism strategies, and tourism policies. So the research examined the inclusion of tourism in climate responses, and it assessed the alignment with both climate change ambitions and the genuine actions. The team spoke to 25 stakeholders from across the 7 different nations, making sure to include the relevant tourism and climate leads in each one. As an output, we produced 7 specific reports which highlighted the key gaps and made recommendations around integration of climate actions in the tourism sector. So what did we find then? Most of what we found, again, isn't just relevant in the Caribbean, but we think it's relevant to many destinations in Europe and beyond. Climate change is often treated as a large-scale and external issue, and it translates into broad intentions that don't then have specific and detailed roadmaps to mainstream climate change into particular sectors. So currently the energy sector receives most of the focus, and initiatives have been slow to trickle down into other industries such as tourism. Interestingly, the tourism market in the Caribbean, and I think elsewhere, is indirectly driving climate change adaptation. So sustainability practices like water, energy, and nature conservation, they save businesses money, they enhance visitor experiences, and they improve the climate resilience of the destination. However, of course, destinations continue to be focused on growing visitor numbers and keeping as many tourists as tourists visiting in this competitive market. But what's needed is a more holistic approach and also more action to back up the intentions that are laid out in the policy documents. Many of the existing governance frameworks don't put forward a coordinated response to climate change impact management, and at best, policies acknowledge climate change impacts on tourism assets like hotels or travel hubs, but the main priority remains on protecting competitiveness. And so typical tourism stakeholders aren't aware of how their actions are feeding into the national climate change response. So when it came to identifying and addressing the gaps, there are some common threads. As we identified, the approach to climate change planning isn't joined up across sectors. So an opportunity here could be if the renewable energy equipment and technology adopted in energy production, for example, was also incentivised in tourism development to drive carbon reduction goals. A gap the team kept coming back to was the fact that investment in tourism often directly contradicts climate intentions. With high carbon projects, such as mega resorts, for example, frequently go ahead, and many are actually subsidised or incentivised by governments. Obviously, the economic pillar is being prioritised over the environmental one. It was notable that understanding of climate change and sustainability needs enhancing. Even at quite senior levels, this was true. Climate change and the language around it are quite complex, after all. Decision makers are often much more comfortable talking about growth and economics. It's more familiar territory for them. But the lack of understanding can really impact on the confidence needed to take bold decisions and drive the climate agenda forward. We've talked about data, and in many cases, less data was being collected than would be ideal. But what we also found that often useful data was being collected, but it just wasn't being widely shared. And this potentially seems quite an easy gap to address. However, we also see that it's caused by a marked tendency towards silo working, and I think this again was mentioned this morning, and all the inefficiencies and duplications that you get from that. And that also means that the fantastic opportunities for cross-fertilisation are just lost. We also see increasing popularity for environmental regulations, such as the banning of single-use plastics or the creation of protected areas. But there's much less enthusiasm for and funding for policing and enforcing those regulations. So closing the gaps. When it comes to closing the gaps, national energy policies and renewable energy incentives should extend to tourism and other industries, as emphasised in the previous slide. It's important, though, that tourism strategies are climate smart. Again, this is about joining up policy into one coherent narrative. As those two first points illustrate, a silo working culture is counterproductive, and tackling climate challenges will require joined up working and joined up thinking both within and across sectors. And for that, it's necessary to share data and knowledge so that lessons can be learned and plans can be made together. We also need to provide training across sectors and at all levels that will equip stakeholders to incorporate climate considerations into tourism planning. It will also help people recognise the opportunities for working across sectors and help reduce the silo culture we've talked about. And also, nature has to be seen as an opportunity. Globally, there are so many examples. We've just heard a fantastic example of one in Ireland, where nature-positive tourism can drive momentum to protect the natural assets that help combat climate change. One example in Barbados is the beach refurbishment and coral reef conservation project that supports its core sun, sea and sand tourism offer. But that same project also protects the beaches against storm surge and coastal erosion caused by climate change. So this is just one example, but the tourism industry can be so creative. It just needs to work across sectors and involve experts in its planning. And also, it's pretty obvious that toothless policies and regulations that no one knows about won't work. So effective planning has to contain funding streams for communicating and enforcing new regulations. So what are the key takeaways for you as managers of tourism destinations? The first is to do what you can to make sure tourism has a seat at the table when the issues are discussed and climate change plans are made, both locally and nationally. So whoever is working on climate change in your area, meet up with them and look together about where you can collaborate. Support stakeholders. In your role as tourism leaders, focus on bringing key people together with knowledge sharing and training, the cultivation of technical expertise, and the mobilization of sustainable financing to create real change. Don't underestimate the value of technical expertise and input in helping to craft key messaging and lending credibility to your strategies. And encourage natural solutions. It's a win-win, and it's great to see it's a concept that's really gaining traction. The IPCC believes that using nature-based solutions could contribute around 30% of the global mitigations required to keep carbon dioxide within manageable levels. And tourism can play a huge role in this, because it provides tangible economic incentives for destinations to conserve and protect their natural environments. So thanks for listening today. I hope you found it interesting. I know it's about the Caribbean, but I really hope there are some lessons that you can draw on that might be useful in your own environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.